Hey there! This video is about 12 features and settings that you should know about in the Canon R5C. So let's get started. All right, the first one is the fact that the Canon R5C has a digital level that you can turn on and off, and it's a little bit hard to find it in the menu system, so let me show you where that is. So if we press the menu button, if you don't know this, you can toggle between the big folders at the top by using the dial over here. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go over to this one here, the monitoring setup, and we are going to go to page number 5. And down to custom display 1. Now, if we go down here, we can see that it says level. And when we hit that, there are a few different options. You can turn on tilt, roll, or tilt and roll. So let me show you what those look like. So let's select tilt and roll. All right, so this is what it looks like with the tilt and roll enabled. And you can see that if I rotate the camera like this, you can see that the roll changes. And if I lift it up and down, the tilt changes. I find the tilt is a little bit distracting, but I do really like to have the roll turned on, but this is personal preference. So if I go back into the menu here and I just turn on roll, then I just get the horizontal. So that's my personal preference, but that's how you turn that on and off. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is making the LCD screen brighter. Now the screen on the back of the R5C is very nice. Canon does a nice job with that, but often I need to turn the brightness up because I'm shooting outside or whatever. And I think a lot of people choose the wrong setting in the camera. So let me show you the proper setting because it's not the brightness setting. So if we go into the menu here and we go to the monitoring, and you can see here the first option is LCD brightness. That's what most people think will turn up the actual screen brightness. Don't use that one, use the LCD luminance. So it's default to normal, and what you want to do is turn that up to +2, and that will allow you to see the screen a lot better outside. I'm just gonna leave it on 0 right now for the sake of this video, but I recommend leaving it on to number 2. Now, the other thing you can do here, if you go over to the next page, is you can actually adjust the viewfinder luminance as well. So make sure you set that properly so you can see what you're doing. The third thing is gonna be the power saving mode in this camera. I know a lot of you might know about this already, but this was added in a somewhat recent firmware update and allows you to stretch the battery life inside your camera. Now, there are some stipulations about different modes and settings and stuff that you can and can't use. But let me show you where this is and show you those things. So if we go under here under the menu, we go over to the system settings. The first page here, power saving mode. If we click on this, it tells you all the things that you can and cannot do. So you cannot shoot RAW or 16:9 8K or higher resolution. So any of the 8K modes. You can't shoot slow and fast mode at XFAVC Intra, and you can't adjust the LCD and viewfinder luminance, which is a bummer because that's what I was just talking about. So if you need to have a brighter screen, you cannot turn the power saving mode on. So just keep that in mind. And then there's also functions that communicate with external devices and accessories powered from the camera. So if you can get away with not using any of these things, it will give you a little bit more juice in your battery. So as you can see right here, it says that my camera has 56 minutes of runtime. So if I turn this on and back out of this, it will recalculate up to 75 minutes. So you get a little bit extra power per battery, which can really stretch it out, especially if you're doing that over the course of several batteries. But of course, keep in mind, you have to shoot in certain modes. And of course, you can't turn the LCD luminance up like I was just talking about. So the fourth thing is the ability to shoot RAW in 60 frames per second without using USB-C power delivery. Now, most people know that to shoot the 8K60 RAW, you do need to have this connected to USB-C power delivery so that the lens works properly. Now, there's a little bit of like a hack or workaround that I'm gonna talk about here. And I did talk about this in a video that I made about using the Canon Speed Booster on the R5C. And if you're interested in more details about that, I'll leave that video linked down below. But let me show you how this works. All right, so going into the menu here and we go over to the third page over, we go to the recording media settings and we scroll down here. You can see this is how I usually have the camera set up, shooting in full frame, the XFAVC 4:2 shooting in the 4K long op in 23.98. This is generally how I shoot with this camera. So let's change this into RAW. So we're gonna go to the recording format and let's change this to RAW LT. And you can see here that the main resolution has shifted to 8K. And when we go down to 23.98 for the frame rate, you can see we can choose 60 frames per second and it doesn't give us an error. And that's because I'm using USB-C power delivery. So now let me unplug the power here. And now when we go in here under frame rate, if I click on 60 frames per second, it gives me this error or warning. So the way around this is kind of weird, but it works. And that's to change this to Super 35. So this will actually give you a 5.9K raw output from this, and you can shoot up to 60 frames per second with just the internal battery and get full control and usability with your lens. So a little bit of a workaround, and if you want to, you can actually use the speed booster on this to get a wider field of view. And as I said, check out the video. I'll leave that video linked down below. All right, so on to the fifth one. And this one has to do with the fact that the camera can actually tell you which modes you can shoot in based on what kind of power options that you're using. So if you press the menu here and we go under the wrench here for system settings, and the first option here is the power source navigation. So if we click on that, there's a couple different options here, and I just find this really cool because you don't have to remember all the stuff and which combinations work and all that sort of stuff. So there's two different options here. You can check the required power source or check the available recorded setting. So let's check the required power source. So for this, you have to select which kind of lens you're using. So either RF or EF, or you can have it just see what lens you're using. So let's do that. Let's do attached lens. And then let's say I want to shoot raw in 31 to 60 frames per second. Well, if I click on that, and you can also select multiple things. So let's say I also want to shoot in 4K up to 120 frames per second, and I go to OK. It will say I need to use USB power delivery or the DC coupler. The other option that it's not showing is the internal battery. So if I go back here and let's say unclick this, which is the main thing is 8K60, and I have this one selected, so 4K up to 120 frames per second, I go to OK. You can see you can do that with the battery pack. So that's pretty cool that it shows you that you can do that. So let's back out of here, because that will show you what you're using and sort of what you need to have in terms of power. Now, the other thing it can do here is you can check the available recording settings based on the situation that you're already using. So if you go in here and you say, okay, RF lens or EF lens, or we'll just say, let's use the attached lens, then what you can do here is you can select the power that you want to be using. So let's say you want to just use the battery pack. Well, it will tell you all the modes you can and cannot use. So as you can see here, you can't shoot in 8K above 30 frames per second, but all the other modes you can do that. So if you back out of this, you can also turn on and off the fact that if you're using a XLR mic adapter like the Tascam unit, and if you're curious about how to use that, I made a detailed video about that. I'll leave that video link down below too. If you click on that, and then go to battery pack, you'll see that you have even fewer options. So this one will limit our 6K raw or 5.9K raw up to 60 frames per second, which we were just talking about. So pretty cool that the camera can remind you about what settings you need to have and which power modes and all that kind of stuff. If you want to not remember them, they're in the camera for you. So the next couple of things have to do with autofocus and manual focus. I kind of want to make a full dedicated video about using the autofocus and manual focus stuff in the R5C, because there's a lot of nuances and little details and stuff that could be handy for you. But I want to give you a couple things that you may not have seen before. So let's get into those. So the first one, which is the sixth item in this video, is touch tracking autofocus without using face detect. So let me show you that. All right, so diving into the menu here, all of the autofocus settings are on the 4th and 5th page of the camera setup. I do want to mention that the lens that I'm using has the switch set to autofocus. So of course we're using autofocus for this feature, so make sure you have the lens set to autofocus, not manual focus. Now for the settings here, I'm gonna have the continuous autofocus enabled, so I'm not using disabled or only around a focus point. I want it to look at the whole scene. And then the autofocus frame, again, whole area, so I look at the whole scene. Now going over to the 5th page here, if you're familiar with the R5C, you know that you often turn the face detect and tracking on, and what that does is it enables both face detect and autofocus tracking. Now, like I said, there is a way to use touch tracking without using face detect. So I'm gonna show you how to do this. So first of all, we're gonna turn this off. And to turn the tracking on, can't find a way in the menu to turn it on. You have to set a customizable button. So let me show you how to do that. So if you go over to the assignable buttons section right here, you can set it to any one that you want, but what I like is the 8th button. That is the display panel info. So that is the button up on the top. That is this button up here. So we're gonna set that to turn the tracking on and off. I don't really change that very often. Again, you can change it to whatever you want, but this is the one that I'm gonna show you here. So if we go here and we go to the top and select tracking. So once we select that, that is gonna be customized to turn the tracking on and off. So let me do a quick demonstration to show you how this works. And I apologize for the really boring view here, but this is just what's in front of me. I have my Stream Deck that's usually sitting on my desk here. And so to get this started, we're gonna press the customizable button here, that number 8 to turn the tracking on. And what shows up is you get this little target over here. So you can set the tracking 2 different ways. You can either move the crosshairs to wherever you want and then hit the set button, and that will set up the tracking. So as I move this, it should move the tracking box with it, as you can see. And then the other option, so to cancel this, you just hit the set button and that will take off the tracking. Or if you hit the cancel button on the back, that will end tracking altogether. The other option you can do is you can just touch the screen. So let's say I want to track it right there. You just touch it and that enables it. And then you can see that it is tracking that object there. And one thing to mention about the tracking is that you can see, hopefully, that it has a double box, and that will indicate tracking. So that's how you do this without using the face detect. And again, to get out of this, if you want to change it to a new point, you hit the set button, and then you can click on something else, and it will lock onto that with that double box. And to back out, you just hit cancel, and it'll completely turn off the tracking. So number 7 has to do with focus guide for manual focus. Now, when I'm using manual focus, generally I'm using focus peaking, but the R5C has a really cool feature called focus guide, and you can use this in a couple different ways. So this number 7 will be a combination of different tools, and you can use the focus guide for general points, but you can also use face detect with focus guide. So I'm gonna show you how to do that. So first of all, if you are using a lens that has an autofocus, manual focus switch, make sure you set it to manual focus. If you don't have that, you can go into the menu and you can go to the autofocus settings on page 4 and go to focus mode and change it to manual focus there if your lens does not have a switch on it, but it says it's not compatible with this lens because it knows it has a switch on this one. Now, the next thing you want to do is go over to the assistance functions, and under the first page there, it says focus guide. We are going to turn that on. Now, when we back out of here, you see we have this little green box, and that is showing that it's in focus there because it was autofocused ahead of time. Let me defocus that a little bit. So the way that you change where the box is, you can move it with the cursor here, or you can just touch on the screen. So if we just touch on the screen, and then all we have to do is adjust the focus. And what happens are these little triangles here will show you, oh, look, I'm getting further out of focus. Or if I wanted to get more in focus, I just keep going until it turns green, and there you go, that is in focus. So pretty handy feature. Let me show you another situation that's a little bit further away. So I got Big Poppy here. Let's put him up over here. Let's try to focus on him. All right, so now if I hold the camera up just a little bit to go look at Big Poppy, what'll happen here is I'm gonna touch on Big Poppy, and then I can, David Ortiz, if you're not familiar with who he is, and then I can focus on him just like that. Boom, he's in focus. Now, let me also show you a way that you can do this using face detect. So if we go in the menu and we go over to our autofocus settings and we go to the 5th page over, you can see that face detect and tracking is an option, which is kind of weird considering we're not using autofocus, right? But if you turn this on and we back out of here, so here we are with the face detect on Poppy, and then as I manually focus, you can see I can get it in focus using the focus guide, and it is grabbing his face, so the face detect is working. So pretty cool feature. All right, so number 8 is the focus ring response, and if you're using manual focus, please make sure that you change this. Even if you don't use manual focus that often, make sure you go change this so that the manual focus works a lot better, because a lot of times we're using focus by wire lenses, like these RF lenses, and this gives you a lot better response when you're using manual focus. So go into the menu, and we're gonna go over to the system settings, the wrench, and we are gonna go to page 5. And you can see here that focus ring response is, I have it already set to linked to rotation degree. Please make sure you change that. It defaults to varies with rotation speed if you've never changed this. Basically, with rotation speed, the faster you turn the focus, the faster it will focus. You want it to link to rotation degree because that's kind of how a normal lens works. This makes the response a lot better. It's not the same as using a manually coupled lens, like an old vintage lens or a cinema lens or something like that, but this makes it a lot better. So number 9 has to do with vertical shooting. So if you're doing any vertical content, this will be really handy for you. And if you've done this before, you probably rotate your camera and then you have to look at the screen sideways. So I'm going to show you here how to rotate the display on the R5C, but also there's a combination of settings that will allow your NLE to automatically rotate the image when you bring the files into post. Now, I can't speak for all the different NLEs, but I know this works in Final Cut. So let me show you those things and give you some tips about vertical shooting. So first of all, let me show you how to rotate the screen. So if we go in the menu and we go over to the monitoring setup and to the 6th page over, when we scroll down, you can see the OSD or on-screen display orientation for the LCD and viewfinder. And if you click on that, there are a few different options. So we go to 0 degrees, that's the normal one, and you can rotate the camera's display. So if we go to the first one here and I back out, you'll see that it has rotated it this way. So that's pretty cool. Now the other thing here is if the one that I like is this way, this is kind of my preferred orientation. So then you have it all looking like this. So one thing that's really weird about this is that if you turn the waveform on, it's still sideways. So let me show you that. So in the menu, if we go over to the assistant functions and we go to the 6th page, we go to waveform LCD, we'll turn that on. And so now when I back out of this, even though I turn the camera vertical, the waveform is still horizontal. So come on, Canon, this is silly. So anyways, let me show you how to make this a little bit easier for yourself. So what I like to do is set a custom button for changing this. So if we go in the menu and we go over to the assignable button section, with the button that I like to use, of course, you can use any one that you want. I like to use the one on the front, number 12, which is down in the front of the camera. And that one, I will set this to that setting that we just talked about. So the on-screen display orientation LCD viewfinder. So if I click that and I back out of this, now when I press that button underneath, and again, you can use any button you want, it will rotate the screen for you. So that is super handy. That's what I like to use. Okay, so now let me talk about the second part of this vertical shooting stuff and how I can get it to automatically rotate the image in the editing software. So as I said, this works in Final Cut. I can't speak for other softwares, but let me show you where this is in the camera. So if we go in the menu and we go to the recording media page here, and like I said before, my preferred recording is the XFABC 42210-bit in the UHD long op. So if you do this and you have the camera in a vertical orientation and you rotate the screen, it will not rotate it automatically. I don't know why. But what I found out was if you actually change this to the MP4 option, which is the still records in 42210-bit, then when you record with the camera in a vertical orientation with the screen rotated, it will automatically flip the image for you in post. Very, very handy. I don't know why it does this in MP4 and not the XFABC. And I personally haven't tested the XFABC versus MP4 to see how much difference there is in terms of image quality. But for me personally, especially if you're doing content for like Instagram and other social media where you're going to be, probably exporting in 1080p anyways, this is super handy to save yourself a step. So couple tips about vertical shooting. Number 10, there's a couple of options about the waveform. So I know I briefly talked about waveform, but let me show you where those are in here. So if we go over to the assistance functions and we go down to where we were before on page number 6 here, we can go to the waveform settings. The first thing you want to do is make sure you turn the waveform on. So you can turn it on for, the LCD, the viewfinder, or over HDMI. Now, if we go down to the waveform function, we can select 2 different options, waveform monitor or vector scope. I'm going to leave it on waveform monitor. Now, when we go down to the waveform settings here, this is what's really interesting is that you can change the size of the waveform. Well, this is pretty easy to do. You can either do normal, which is what we have here. That's normal. Or you can go to 2x, and that makes it twice as big. The other way that you can change this is by just touching it, making it smaller and larger. So it's kind of a silly thing, but that's where that is in there. You can also change the position. So it was on the right, now it's on the left, make it smaller. We'll put it back on the right. And the one thing I wanted to point out here, which is really interesting, is the type. So right now it's set at line, and another option is line plus spot. So let me show you what those look like. All right, so here we are, we have it set at line. So this is the normal one that we're all sort of used to. You can see it right there. And if I make it bigger or smaller, you can see it's just the normal one. Now, if I change this to line plus spot, this is really interesting because now there's this red box that shows up and that corresponds with the red that is on the waveform. So as you move this around, the red box will indicate different parts of the image, and that will be indicated on the waveform there. So a cool little feature with the waveform. So number 11 has to do with false color, and not the fact that this camera has false color, which I absolutely love, but the fact that this camera includes a false color chart if you are new to false color and you can't remember what the different colors mean. So let me show you where that is in the camera. So if we go in the menu and we go to the assistance page, and we go down to the 4th page over, and we go down to false color index. When you click on this, this will show you what all the different colors mean. So red would be when the highlights are clipping. Pink, for example, is one stop over middle gray. Green is middle gray. And black is, or sorry, the purple is where the shadows or the blacks are clipping. So pretty cool that it has that in there. So you can, if you don't remember what the colors are, you can look them up. Okay, the last one, number 12, is the fine iris adjustment. So most of us are used to the fact that when we change the iris, we go from like 2.8 to 3.2 to 3.5 to 4, right? Those are third stop increments. So if we go in the menu, and this is actually the first page here, the iris mode, of course, you should have it in manual. You can actually change the iris increment from a third to a half. I don't know why you do that, but let's leave it in 1/3. Now, the other thing here is the fine increment. So if we can turn this on and we back out of here and we go to change the iris, you can see now that there are lots of different stops. So there's actually 32 little selections between 2.8 and f4. So instead of being in third stops, are in 1/32 stops. So this is really handy because if you want to make really subtle changes to your exposure, you can do that. And you can also, with this, kind of make changes while the camera's rolling, and it's not as jarring because they're much smaller changes. So pretty cool little feature. Okay, so those are the 12 things that I promised. There is a bonus tip, so let me show you that one too. So if you're looking at your main screen here and you press on here at the bottom left, you can quickly, you already saw me do this, but go in and, you know, change your aperture and your ISO and all that stuff. But if you press this button down here, it opens up all of the assist tools. So you can turn focus guide on and off here without going into the menu. I know I showed you before all the long ways of getting in there. You can turn peaking on and off, the waveform you can turn on and off, the vector scope. You can also turn zebras on and off if you're using those. You can turn false color on and off here, which I actually usually set to a custom button. And you can also turn the view assist on and off here too. So really handy to have that right in there. So if you got some value out of this video, please, I would appreciate you hitting subscribe. That would be awesome. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.